like to announce that this meeting will be recorded for the purposes of the project, and also it will be published on the ODRA's YouTube channel. Also, this webinar is organized as a contribution to the Rural Pact, because ODRAS is a member of Rural Pact, and our discussion today aligned with its objective. This is a framework launched by the European Commission to strengthen governance and cooperation in EU rural areas, aiming for stronger, connected, and resilient rural communities. So with this event, we contribute to the implementation of long-term vision for rural areas as well. The goal of this webinar is actually to enhance understanding and awareness on transport poverty, particularly in rural areas. So relevant researches conducted in the region will be presented. Also, we will discuss policy recommendations and measures that can ensure a just transition toward climate neutrality, as well as better quality of life in the communities affected with transport poverty. So, as we all may know, transport poverty is a challenge for many communities nowadays, and rural areas face additional mobility constraints, which can then significantly impact the quality of life and access to all essential services, such as education and healthcare, employment, going to buy some groceries, and similar. Moreover, transport poverty is recognized as a key barrier in ensuring a just transition toward climate neutrality, as I mentioned earlier. And although there are importance of it all around us, this concept remains relatively unexplored in transport spatial planning and transport management. So this is the main purpose that we have this webinar today, to raise the awareness and actually to improve the understanding among all the participants that joined this event. So during this webinar, we will dive deeper in specific challenges and specific solutions suggested by our speakers and panelists. So we will begin with 4 presentations, followed by a panel discussion in next 2 hours. There are some housekeeping rules that I would like to remind you about. So please stay muted while the presentations are ongoing. And if you would like to speak, use the raise your arm button, which you may find in the right upper corner of your screen. Take note again that this webinar will be recorded and published on ODRA's YouTube channel. And also please submit your questions that you have for speakers through the chat or Q&A that also is available in the right upper corner of your screen. We'll address them during the panel discussion, except the questions for Vladimir. He has to leave for another meeting in a while. So if you have questions for Vladimir, you can post it immediately after his presentation. And now, without further ado, I will invite our first speakers from Romanian part of Mobilissimus, our dear colleagues from Romania, actually, Dragoș and Sophie. They are both passionate about mobility, active travel, and in promoting equitable transport options for everyone, and mobility solutions tailored for the user's needs. So with the colleagues from Mobilissimus, from Hungarian part, they analyzed accessibility challenges in rural areas for 2 municipalities, gathering evidence and insights. So they also worked on developing a tool to improve public transport accessibility in areas affected by mobility poverty. So listen carefully to their presentations, and in the end, there's the video waiting for you, dear participants, so stay tuned. Dragoș and Sophie, over to you.
Thank you very much. I will start the presentation, and can you hear me well?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And Dragoș, can you share the presentation as well, please?
I'm doing it as we speak.
Thank you.
And tell me when you see it. up on the
Yeah,
screen?
it's visible.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you very much. We are really happy to be here. My name is Zsófia Gira, and actually I'm working in the Hungarian part of Mobilissimus, but that's not a problem. And we are three who were working on this project and in this research. It's myself, András, and Dragos, who will also share the presentation. I will start. Yeah, thank you. So Mobilissimus is a mobility planning and consultancy company with a focus on Central and Eastern Europe. We offer planning and consultancy in broad scale of fields within mobility for public and also private clients. We work on the local, regional, national, and European level as well. We are 12 experts with different backgrounds, and we have the secretariat role for the Hungarian, for the Magyar CVNet as well. We work with different activities such as awareness raising and sound building, network and service planning. So we really work on a broad range of activities. And during our daily work, but also in our everyday life, we have the opportunity to travel. We very much like to stick to sustainable modes of transport and had the chance to see the bright side of mobility, where actually high quality services offered for travelers. Here we have collected some of these pictures, and we don't even have to travel a lot for these services because these pictures are all from the Central Eastern European region. So this is when high quality service is offered. However, it's not only about the bright and glory, we are also aware the less bright side of the mobility. Asking AI to design a picture about transport poverty, we get this picture, this result, which is unfortunately not so distant from what we have seen during our research in Hungary and in Romania. Yeah, these are some pictures from what we saw on the ground on the field during our work. As it has been introduced, Mobilissimus had the luck to be able to work on mobility poverty in 2024, so last year, and dig deeper what happens, especially in Central European and Eastern European territories. And the presentation is basically the result of this comparative research that we have been conducting for more or less for a year. We started from the literature and the higher level definitions and how it's seen in a higher level mobility poverty and transport poverty. And we saw that not so much exact literature and previous researches are done about the topic. But for example, the European Parliament speaks about transport poverty as lack of adequate transport services necessary to access general services and work, or the inability to pay for these transport services. So it's or about accessibility or affordability. Understanding deeper the phenomenon, we collected the following symptoms that can describe mobility poverty. These are accessibility, affordability, time and territorial coverage gap, as well as all the mix of those symptoms. We selected 2 pilot regions for the analysis and for the research. One is in Hungary and one in Romania. In the case study selection, it was important that the territory itself was the right one within the country, but at the same time, different transport options are available. So for example, in the Hungarian part, and there is train coverage and also public bus coverage in the territory. In the research, we used the mixed methodology. That means that we included expert interviews, focus groups, and also policy analysis. We will share some of the results soon. Just one point is that in the end of the research, we explored the possibility of creating a more quantitative tool. That was the right slide, Dragos, more quantitative tool that can give basic recommendations to decision and policymakers. This is the ST, the Survey and Solution Toolkit, but Dragos will be further explain about that. So, yeah, I will leave that to you. And to some of the, I mean, in the later part of the presentation. So some of the Hungarian results. In Hungary, we chose Borsod above Zemplén County, which is a highly deprived county within the country itself too. And we saw that network and services still highly rely on the heritage, what was built decades ago, and no development were made in the last couple of years. That means that the existing networks and services are not in any case in line with the current needs of the residents. One of the most confirmed results of the study in the Hungarian part is that mobility poverty is not about affordability in our case, because also because cheap tickets and season tickets are sold as political products. That means that, for example, children under 14 years old can travel for €2 in a month for all over the country. That's just an example. But also adult tickets are in a very good offer. Mobility poverty in Hungary is more about the lack of reliable services, lack of connection between territories, lack of possibility to reach basic services outside of rush hours or the commuting period. And it's more about children who are late from school due to the lack of adequate services, and elderly who struggle arriving to the healthcare services. Due to this and high level of dissatisfaction with public transport, car trips actually offer a more expensive yet necessary solutions in the Hungarian part. And we also saw that while we expected that in rural areas will be more impacted by mobility poverty, we experienced that also in a more urban areas such as in Miskolc, these problems are more than present as well. And Dragos, please go on.
Perfect. Thanks, Rafi. A quick addition while we go along, I would say that when we said about expert interviews, that means people who are working in the transport environment, being as transport operators or the public authority working on the administrating the transport system. We also talk to people who are professionals or lecturers within the transport sector as well. So they were like the most relevant experiences and most relevant perspectives that we wanted to incorporate in the narrative as well into the SST. And the survey obviously was with the population, and the focus groups was done in areas relevant in both Hungary and Romania. For the Romanian context, to make it clear, it's at the border between Brașov County and Covasna County. In Toroșura Buzăului, which is the very specific site, it is in Toroșura Buzăului, but that is literally 10 kilometers into the county. And then most people travel between Toroșura Buzăului and Brașov, and they refer to Brașov as the main urban center. As you'd expect, with mobility poverty, they do get long waiting times. It is a large rural area around. Toroșura Buzăului is a small town. You can almost describe this as rural. And the most vulnerable, the poorest population, the elderly, are unavoidably the most affected. Although we have talked to lots of younger people and school and high school age people, and they were facing the same issues, relying on their neighbors, relying on friends to drive them wherever they needed to, or not having the right service to come back home after class in Brașov, or maybe they were attending school in Brașov and they had after school activities in Brașov and they were stuck in Brașov, not having public transport accessible to get them home. And it's also the physical element as well. And you will see trains that are impossible to climb on for an elderly person, for instance. You will see operations that are not serving the user because of the scheduling, because of the lack of synchronization, harmonization between services or railway services and bus services. And overall, because of the diversity in the area, and I'm talking about social and racial diversity here, There are people who are afraid to get on some of those trains, for instance, as well, and that is increasing that transport poverty aspect significantly. Examples we see here, it's literally two train coaches, and then one, traditionally speaking, is used by the Romanian population, one by the Roma population, which is a big aspect that we shouldn't really see and we don't want to see around, but it is a reality in the context we were looking at. And then with those aspects in mind, we're looking at incorporating our perspectives from the ground, our research, talking to those people on the ground, and then incorporating that into the SST and feeding all the information from the professionals, from the expert interviews we had to develop this tool. The tool itself, it is an Excel-based tool and is trying to literally incorporate data based on railway, bus, the level of service offered by those services, the level of accessibility offered by those services, and collect that information to recommend a sort of a baseline starting point for recommendations for policymakers, local representatives, transport authorities to be able to tackle transport poverty in a structured way. It is as a prototype, we still have to roll it out more widely. We are still looking for people like the CVNet network members to test it, and we're more than willing to share that with you and understand what works and how can you apply it, if that is applicable to you, what can be tweaked to make it more relevant for the area. As I was saying, it is looking at all the smaller aspects that are leading towards mobility poverty. And it is tough because it's hard to say that it's a universal tool, but that's our starting point to define a baseline of universal measures as part of the SST. This is just a glimpse of how the tool itself looks like and what aspects it is looking at, what type of question, what type of answer is it seeking. And based on that, it will do a bit of a rating, prioritizing the most important measures based on the description that it captured through that input data set, basically. Overall, that is leading us to have more meaningful conversations with policymakers. It is leading us to have more meaningful conversations with those planning our transport system and raise awareness, not necessarily just towards at a higher level, but also at the population level where they can demand change. We found and recommend ways to improve the home to work journeys, how to maximize the service, how to increase how people actually access that service, how accessible it is to find information about the service is possible, improving efficiency and ticketing systems. All those measures are might look like impressive, expensive measures, but actually most of the time when they are implemented, except in the first element, long term they will pay off, and the investment will be creating a more attractive service that will generate patronage, that will generate more revenues, and then people will actually buy into that idea of using public transport. Nice services and tariffs that are working towards advantaging or having a, not advantage necessarily, but definitely supporting the elderly, supporting the poorer population, the rural populations are going to make the biggest difference. Synchronizing those timetables will enable the rural population to actually reach the city center, the urban center, and maybe sell some produce, for instance. Overall, we are looking at delivering the SST in a way that is going to decrease the car dependency, that is going to improve and eliminate the barriers that we all know about currently. And overall, if we can make it a more equitable society, a more equitable community, a more vibrant community that is better connected, it is a result that we all aspire towards, let's say. It can be more complex. It can be about timetables and improving reliability of services and remove the unpredictability. But removing that level of unpredictability might be a more complex process from our perspective. But nevertheless, it is part of what diminishes the level of mobility poverty. If they're ambitious, or the local authority or the transport operator, they can also have more tech-based solutions. They can have more digitalized solutions that are going to change the perspective and the usage. But we are aware that currently the ambition is quite high, but in a rural area, it is quite difficult to actually impose or embed those measures as a starting point. Therefore, we're looking for a mix of both ground level grassroots interventions as well as high-tech interventions. Overall, that is in a nutshell our research and our quick run through to what we have done on the ground and what we have tried to do on our mobility poverty mission, to say so. So I will let Geoff introduce quickly the video which was mentioned in the beginning, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. I'm looking forward to see you in the panel and hear those questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so as a result of the research project, we also have a 3 minutes video, and it was created because we wanted to avoid that mobility poverty and the study of this topic would remain only for those who are really interested. So we wanted to create something which is more accessible for everybody and can help to make understand what is it all about and how different social groups are impacted. So I hope you will like this video. I really like it and enjoy, and see you in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now play the video.
Are your passengers struggling to get to work, school, a concert, or even a doctor's appointment? Or they might be able to reach their destinations, but will find themselves stranded without an option to return home in the evening. Are those living in your community spending countless hours and a significant portion of their income just to reach their destinations each day? Within your local authority or your local transport system, do you know of neighborhoods, villages, education institutions, or large employment sites that are difficult to reach independently? These challenges are signs of mobility poverty. Mobility poverty is a silent barrier that divides people and communities. It means limited access to transportation, where the freedom to move is restricted by circumstances, not by choice. For instance, living in a suburban area often means that citizens have no choice but to use their cars. These areas typically have a very low population density, and they spread over a very large area. That's why running bus services from here is perceived as not worthwhile. Imagine if your passengers could walk or cycle to a suburban railway station within 10 minutes from their homes, and then catch a train to anywhere quickly and affordably. But if the trains are frequently late, slow, expensive, or the station is difficult to access due to poor infrastructure, or worse, there's no station at all, their only option becomes driving or relying on someone who can do, leading to time lost in traffic jams and high transportation costs. Citizens are pushed into a vulnerable position where they can't access important services or even their workplace at all, making their options even more limited. Mobility poverty is having a negative impact on rural areas also, and it is affecting the most vulnerable groups most intensively. Transportation services are typically very limited here. Typically, there would be only one bus in the morning and another one in the evening. Getting to the nearest town or city becomes a daily struggle due to poorly coordinated transfers, outdated vehicles, and costly fares. This can isolate the citizens and cause problems that affect every aspect of their life. Because transportation is not just about getting from point A to point B. Good transport also means access to new jobs, better quality healthcare, higher education, and access to the services, economy, culture, and society of other communities. That's why understanding the consequences of mobility poverty is crucial. And that's why it is so important investing in public transport in small towns and cities also. Addressing mobility poverty with comprehensive solutions is not only to give the choice back for the masses, but to provide access to a better and happier life. Take this as a call to action and give power to those seldom heard voices by asking for the right changes to create happier and healthier communities, where transport options are inclusive and contribute to thriving and attractive urban and rural spaces.
Thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed that video. And obviously the topic is large and we rushed everything into 15 minutes and the video, but we're looking forward to the questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that video summarizes nicely what you have presented in your presentation, and from your analysis and from your tool to address mobility challenges. So thank you for this nice introduction also to the transport poverty as a topic, but also to your to your analysis and research. And as you mentioned, in few times, mobility poverty is usually caused by circumstances, not by choice. So I would agree with that and continue to our next presentation. Also, you paved the way for understanding the specific regional contexts and geographical context. So the next presentation will actually provide an overview of passenger public transport in a rural area of Croatia. So we'll hear it from Vladimir Halgota, an independent researcher from Croatia, and he has actually a background in sociology and sustainable mobility studies. So he works mostly on the topics related to traffic, urbanism, and environmental issues, with a focus on reducing forced car ownership and promoting sustainable transport modes. As I said earlier in the beginning, Vladimir have another meeting to attend later on, so he will not be able to stay with us during the panel discussion. You are very welcome to post the questions in Q&A or in Q&A part or chat. So we'll address questions for Vladimir immediately after his presentation. But for the next speakers that are here for the panel discussion, all the questions will be addressed later. Vladimir, the floor is yours now.
Thank you. Thank you for this lovely introduction. And also I want to say thank you to my colleagues who were just before, because I'm very impressed with the presentation, and especially the video. I want to translate it and use it in Croatia because it explains the issue very precisely. So most of what you described as issues in Hungary and Romania is also present in Croatia, perhaps even to a higher degree in some parts. So I'm going to just say that without going into specific examples, because you gave such a good introduction. So my presentation is based on research funded by European Climate Foundation, part of the project Transport Poverty with a focus on rural mobility. And yeah, just as a short introduction about the situation with transport poverty, mobility poverty in Croatia. The fact is that currently it's still not part of any national policy. There is some academic discourse, some academic reviews mentioning it, perhaps in some other language, like transport disadvantage. But the theme of mobility poverty is present and recognized in various documents and policies regarding social exclusion, general poverty, regional inequalities, and especially negative demographic trends, which are plaguing most of the rural part of the nation. And I can say that we do have a lot of effort at various levels of government to address some sort of transport disadvantage. But the measures are not coherent, they are not coordinated, and they're difficult to keep track of moving around the country. Perhaps living at one place, a person can be a person learns about the possibilities they have and subsidies that they are entitled to by the local government, but moving around, going to different parts of the country, it's very difficult to know what's even accessible, because there is, of course, the lack of information together with lack of service in some parts. A good thing is that as part of the Social Climate Fund preparation, the National Social Climate Plan is being created. So hopefully in 2 years or 3 years in a discussion such as this, we'll have a very different presentation to give. Just as an overview about what's happening in terms of statistics, this is one part of the research done several years ago about difficulty in accessing public transport for people with the lowest income. And what this graph is showing is that There, on the left side of the graph, there are relatively few people in Croatia, like 12%, saying that they have high difficulty accessing public transport, which sounds good, depending on when we look at it through the income lens. However, when we look at this through the level of urbanization, so when we look at this question through where people live, people in rural areas seem to have again like 9%, only 9% seem to have high difficulty accessing public transport. But if we look at the opposite side of the graph to the right, where people are saying they have very low difficulty accessing public transport, which would suggest or imply that it's accessible, we see a paradox that it seems to be that there 12% are saying we have easy access to public transport in rural areas compared to 6% in towns or suburbs. But this is not true. And the fact is that the mental image of people in Croatia, Croatian rural areas, is that they don't even think about public transport as a solution. We don't have problems accessing public transport because there is no public transport. So it's just an indication of what we're dealing with. And part of the story is as well that people are increasing with buying cars to tackle this problem. And we can see a trend of increasing expenses on for transport based on household expenditures survey, and we're seeing that people are buying more and more cars. What's happening as well is that there's a gender gap between men and women owning not cars but driver's licenses, and we're seeing that this gap is closing down. However, this in a way is a good thing because women are becoming more independent and less less dependent on the man in the house to drive them around. However, this does have implications on mobility in general, traffic congestion, and it's an issue which has a negative outcome as well. So this is an example of one elderly woman, Grandma Frida, getting her first driver's license, which is easier than looking for her third husband. So this is a story from newspaper from rural countryside, and it's just a vignette of what's happening around the country. So just as an overview on public transport in general, which I'll get to in a minute. We do have many subsidies, national level, county level, local level. However, it's quite questionable about the effect of those subsidies, whether they are simply something to cover some of the expenses of existing service providers, or is this actually providing value and the necessary services for the people who are most needful of those services for transport. So we also have some paradoxes that some of the national subsidies are for clean vehicles, aimed towards replacing internal combustion engines with electrical or hybrid cars. However, this fund doesn't involve funding electric bicycles or cargo bikes for cities, which would be quite practical, as we know from Central Europe. We do have some demand-responsive transport for vulnerable groups, especially for patients getting to hospital, getting to hospitals. That's not about emergency ambulance care, but regular visits and stuff like that to the doctor. And we also have some demand-responsive transport for people with disabilities and difficulty in movement. However, there is very little demand-responsive transport besides regular city taxi, but they're not available in rural areas for people in those areas. There's very little shared mobility. It's mostly based in cities for bike sharing or scooter sharing. And there is, since the pandemic, an increase in virtual mobility. So this event, for example, is an example of virtual mobility. We could have been in a conference in a hotel somewhere, but we are all staying in our offices or homes, so we are able to connect without actually needing mobility services, which is in a way a good thing, but also can be a problem if we never meet in face to face. So just to say something more about the context of public transport in Croatia, or especially rural Croatia. So Croatia has 20+1 regional authorities, county levels, županije. And what we have as a historical situation is that it was the public transport services, bus services were provided based on market interest from the service providers. Yeah, so they would bid and compete to win a particular county and have the right to deliver services at particular routes. However, winning those concessions, winning the right for some routes, didn't actually mean that those routes would be provided. So it would depend on profitability, whether a particular bus route would actually be working, how many times per day, etc. So this is part of the reason why. So what I presented in the first part was happening, that people are more and more buying cars, because depending on public transport was not actually giving them the mobility they needed. So commercial viability historically was the one that determined actual coverage. There is also an issue of using, at one point several years ago, high school became mandatory, and it turned out that, of course, if something is mandatory, it needs to be enabled. So there was a subsidy for public transport to get pupils the ability to get to school and get back home. But this turned out to be like a leverage for, in a way, influence or blackmail, whichever word you want to use, by the transport providers. I guess the Ministry of Education. So this increased price bloat. So for many areas, this was basically the most profitable or the only profitable part of the business. And this meant that even less service was being provided to all other users, because there simply wasn't enough demand, and there wasn't enough demand, or there wasn't enough income based on tickets, because their service wasn't satisfactory. So this is one example of what we have. This is the Zagreb County, which can be confusing. This is not the city of Zagreb, this is the surrounding county. So in the middle of this map is the city of Zagreb, the capital of Croatia. And what we see here, the blue, are the lines of public transport in the surrounding of the city of Zagreb. And these are the lines which are given concessions by the county. And there are many different providers for these lines. And what we see here is, due to regulation, that none of these are crossing through county lines, and none of these are crossing into the city of Zagreb. So this is part of the problem. We have a very extensive network of public transport inside the city of Zagreb, which is also crossing the borders towards the county. So we do have some sort of connection by public transport, by buses, between the city and the surrounding area. And once again, I'm emphasizing this is the central, the most urban part of Croatia. So even here we have issues, but what the biggest issue is that all of these are not integrated. So we have some talks about providing integrated public services, public transport services, where it would be irrelevant to the user whether the name of the company is A, B, or C. They would just buy a ticket and go where they need to go in the coverage area. However, we don't have that. And not only people need to switch seats, switch buses, but they also need to buy new tickets, buy new providers, and all of that is a hassle. So it can be said that the only people using public transport are those who are prevented by for health reasons, for age reasons, or for money reasons. Nobody is using public transport, or I know some people are using public transport for enjoyment, especially train enthusiasts, but this is not practical for most of the population. And we do have some examples which are quite positive. For example, Šibensko-Kninska Županija, Šibenik-Knin County. In the old system, they had 13 routes in the entire county, and 11 of them were centralized, connecting the hinterlands, the countryside, with the main city of the county. However, there is a switch going on in Croatia that counties are moving from this traditional market-based system towards public service obligation contracts, which are much more subsidized by the county and should be providing better service to the people. And switching to this sort of contract was an opportunity to change the entire map and redraw the entire map of public transport in this county. And this was based on political determination and expert support by the Faculty of Transport. So on the left, what we're seeing on this map is the prior variant. So you can see that like almost 50% or more of the county, which is very sparsely populated. We're talking about villages of maybe 100, 200, 300 people. There was no connection. And to the right, we see the network which is created and started in October last year as an example of what can be done with determination and financing. And of course, this is much more expensive. There are many more kilometers being driven every day by buses. But what we will see, I believe, in the future is that this will slow down or maybe even reverse the hemorrhaging, the bleeding out of the population, the demographic exodus from these parts of the country. So what we have as demographic trends, negative demographic trends, is that young people, young families don't really have the ability to stay living in such rural areas where they need to drive around their kids to school and where any activities, out of school activities, are basically very difficult for parents to organize around because there is no possibility for public transport. And when there is some sort of possibility, this is still far from ideal. Some of the villages only have like 4 connections per day, but still it's much more than what was available before. And hopefully such switch will slow down the demographic leaking of the population in this county and hopefully others. So this is the new map. There are many lines drawn. It's difficult to present shortly like all of the changes they did, but yeah, it costs a lot, but I believe it will be fruitful. National subsidy by the government is 75%. So right now, what they have is the ability not only to go to the main city, but to some hubs along the way, and they're used as connecting hubs towards the main city in the county. And there's also the possibility of on-demand transport, which is also an efficiency thing, that some of the villages will get coverage if somebody calls for the bus to make a detour, which also makes sense. And yeah, GPS tracking, fleet management, which is something that should be part of any public transport, in my opinion. But sadly, we can see that in Croatia, this is maybe the first time that is happening, like really delivering on this. And we also have examples of what's happening when there isn't public transport in areas. So we have NGOs organizing micro transport options. For example, this is one such project, Door to Door, by the Serbian National Council, where they created a project to visit and provide basic services of transport to the elderly in 22 towns, currently 1,300 users. This is the map of some of the areas where they operate. So this is like the really bare necessity of public transport, which is not actually it is public in a way, it's publicly funded and on demand, which is filling the hole of what is really needed in some of these areas. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you for the attention and looking forward to any questions. Yeah, this is one of the stories. Sorry, just to end with this. The deeply entrenched dependency on cars. So we have headlines such as this: famous lawyer caught drunk driving and the court doesn't suspend the license because of the excuses that the person has to drive their children to school or drive them around, which is an example of this car culture, which is part of the issue we're dealing with.
Yeah, thanks, Vladimir, for addressing all these gaps regarding the public transport in Croatia, especially in rural areas. As you mentioned, I like the part of the measures that are fragmented across regions, sectors, and user groups. You highlighted it very well in the presentation, and especially in the last slide. So we can see actually that. As in Dragoš and Sofia's presentation, we face similar problem. You mentioned the same issue of driving kids to school. So that's the common issue because there are no other similar options. I see no questions for you in Q&A session. Is it just for me or nobody can see other? So there's no questions for now.
No, there is one question.
Oh, we have something.
Yeah.
Okay. Dario. Dario, you may now unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, go on.
Okay. First, this is wait. Hello, everyone. My name is Dario. I come from Šibenik University of Applied Science. Thank you, Mr. Vladimir, for this presentation. And this is a second excellent example of public transport from the area of city of Šibenik. I just want to say this new public transport for Šibenik-Knin County started, I think, few months ago. It's very important because some of parts of Šibenik-Knin County didn't have public transport for more than 15 years. So can you think in the rural area are mostly older people, what this new public transport is for them? In these few months, this is good story, this is excellent story, and we hope that this is going to be continue in the next years.
Thanks, Dario, for this nice overview and compliments to both the presentation and to Vladimir's example of Šibenik County public transport. I have there is one question in the chat on Croatian islanders and their transportation poverty.
Yeah, so we have over 1,000 islands. I'm not sure how many are populated, but yeah, whatever the issue is in the mainland, the islands have it worse. So I'm not familiar that any of the islands have local public transport on the islands without the ambition to go to the mainland. But no, there are. Sorry, I know some. But yeah, there is also with all of these issues of financial rentability, the issue of the weather and the ferries, whether they can go and how many times per day. So I'm not sure about the scope of the question, but yeah, to be short about it, it's bad. And yeah, there was another question about the number of public transport operators in the Zagreb municipality, but I'm thinking, I mean, the Zagreb municipality is the city of Zagreb, but perhaps the question was about the county surrounding. The city has the main operator Z, which is the single one, and there are some others, perhaps, which sometimes do something, but on the outside, what I was showing, I think there are between 5 and 10 in the county of Zagreb, Zagrebačka županija.
That's a lot. Well, thanks, Vladimir, for your answers. Ksenia, my right hand for this webinar, helped me with the Q&A. I do not know the reason why I cannot see it, but also Miss Marieta also put the link for the publication. Last month, she said last month they shared a new publication, Good Practices for Tackling Transport Poverty in Rural Areas of Central and Eastern Europe. So they shared it here. So everyone are welcome to download it. Also, we will save the link and share it through our networks, communication networks as well. Now I think we should move on. So thank you, Vladimir, for your contribution to this webinar and also questions answered. If there will be some more related to your topic, we can catch up later and then include it in the report of the webinar. So thank you. We now move on to Petra Gargasovic and her presentation on the challenges and possibilities in addressing transport poverty in Croatia. This will be a little bit broader overview and a context of the Vladimir's presentation, actually. So Petra, actually a short bio of her. She has over 15 years of experience in both public and private sectors, and also her expertise lies in sustainable urban mobility and project implementation. She's also an active facilitator and lecturer in knowledge exchange programs across Europe. She has been recently involved in the research for social climate plan. So there are some findings and some diagrams and data that she would like to show you today. So Petra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the announcement and for calling me to participate. Let me just share my window. Okay. So as you, Magdalena, said, I'm going to address from a broader perspective the challenges and possibilities of addressing transport poverty in Croatia. I also didn't know really how many people are aware of what's currently going on in Croatia related to transport poverty. So I wanted to describe the general context of what we are actually talking about. So there are many webinars and many publications let out recently on the topic of transport poverty. And you might wonder why transport poverty is now in the focus, even though we have no mention of it in national strategic documents. One of the reasons, or the main reason, is that European Union established social climate fund, and she did because the emission trading system, which currently exists, is changing, and it's going to start to cover also the emissions from fuel combustion in buildings, road transport, and some additional sectors. So this means that the costs of fossil-fueled transport services are going to be increased, and also the fuel itself. So European Union wants to prevent certain groups of population to suffer from these increases and to see what kind of other services which are less vulnerable to the fuel prices can be offered. So The Social Climate Fund will provide member states with funding to mitigate the social impacts of emission trading systems too, so ETS2, so that the most affected vulnerable groups receive dedicated financial support and are not left behind. And Croatia, the same as other member states, will include measures and investments in this plan, and the plan should be submitted to the European Commission by June 2025. So how this relates to the overall topic? The process of social climate plan goes like this. So in the first round, main stakeholders have been identified in Croatia. So who is relevant in the process of measure development and implementation? And the working group has been established. This is all done by the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Green Transition. And then the following, I would say, chapter of preparation of the plan has been opened. That is to define the energy and transport poverty, because the plan itself addresses two types of poverty. One is energy poverty, and the second is transport poverty. Of course, since they both rely on energy consumption, they are overlapping, but they are also addressing some specific groups and issues. So the purpose of this assignment is to define who is energy or transport poor, and to define the elements that will help us to see who is actually vulnerable in Croatia, because it's not so simple as you saw from other presentations. Then, in parallel to that, the analysis of the impacts of these new emission trading systems on vulnerable household transport users, micro enterprises, is analyzed. And this is, of course, the analysis of what will happen to the prices of the fuel, of the transport services, of owning a car, and who will or who will not be able to bear this increase, and who will get into the overall poverty group thanks to this transport poverty issue. And at the end, based on everything that is done in these first three cells, the measures and investments to be included in the plan are going to be identified. So I am now going to talk only about the second box. The reason for this is that the analysis of the impacts is mostly related to a statistical analysis and a simulation and forecasting of the prices, which is done by economists, and I wasn't involved into that part. And it's also done on a very, I would say, generic level, because the data that cover the whole Croatia have been used without entering regional differences. So I said that the main thing was to define in the first step the transport poverty in Croatia, since it hasn't been defined before. And Croatia will probably take over the same definition which was given by the European Commission. So it means those individuals and households which are not able or have difficulties to meet the costs of private and public transport, or have limited access to transport, or don't have a public transport at all, needed for their access to essential socioeconomic services and activities, primarily education, health, and jobs. So this actually covers, and I think that Mobilissimus also had it in their presentation, three basic, I would say, problems of affordability, how difficult it is to meet transport costs for different households, the issue of accessibility, how easy it is to reach potential opportunities, which means jobs and education opportunities primarily, and at the end, availability, which includes the analysis of how public transport is present, that not only public transport, but how is private and public transport present in different territories. And when we discussed how to define who is poor and who is not poor, and what kind of information to use as baseline, we got a suggestion, or I would say an obligation from the European Commission to use these indicators. As you can see, these indicators cover all three pillars of transport poverty: affordability, accessibility, and availability, and address both of these I would say, issues of spatial aspects and organizational aspects of transport services. The issue with these indicators proposed by the European Commission is that they are actually, as you can see from the dates, quite old, and they are also based on one quite subjective survey. So, for instance, the second indicator, share of the population for which the next public stop is too far away, this is in this particular survey answered by the citizens in their subjective manner. So it means that I answer, yes, it's too far away for me, and it's like 300 meters away, but for other person, it's not. So there are many issues with applying this. And you can also see that the data are available on the country level. So just by staying with these indicators, we cannot really address specific regional issues in Croatia. Now, trying to think about what would be these specific regional issues in Croatia, as I understand it, that the transport poverty can be correlated to several factors. First are those low income levels and economic inequality, which affects affordability and access to transport in different regions. This is, of course, based on salaries and unemployment and various economic factors. But for this particular webinar, we are focusing mostly on other characteristics of the public transport services and transport in general. So I will move on to the next one, which is limited infrastructure or limited offer of services that actually force the people to use informal or expensive modes of transport. First of all, they are required probably and most oftenly to have a car. And this is characteristic for low-income regions because people, although they have low income, do not have other options to have cars, and then they buy old cars, which are significant pollutants, which consume a lot of fuel, and then they have to pay a high price for the fuel, etc., etc. So you can see how this all is quite connected. Number three is the degree of urbanization and specific problems of transport poverty on rural areas of Croatia. But just to go a bit deeper into the topic and not stay only at listing these factors that impact transport poverty, I will use the accessibility to regional centers by public transport map, which is from the National Transport Strategy. And although it's created, I would say, a long time ago, probably the data used is from 2015, which is 10 years. Not much has actually changed. Maybe in some parts, like Šibenik County, as you just saw, things have improved. But for most of the country, the situation has even worsened after COVID-19 pandemics. So this map actually shows how much time a person needs to reach the regional center where most of the main services, public services, are located by using public transport. And these, I would say, orange and brown parts are the ones from which people need to travel 2 hours and 30 minutes or longer to reach the regional centers. So you can see from the map that Northwest Croatia has the best public transport coverage, and Varaždin and Zagreb are most approachable regional centers. However, in other parts of Croatia, the time required increases up to 6 hours, and you can see from this map that counties of Lika, Senj, Sisak, Moslavina, Karlovac, Požega, Slavonia, Bjelovar, Bilogora, the hinterland of Split, Dalmatia, Zadar, and Šibenik, which has now improved, have big problems. Also, the majority of all islands, someone asked about islands, I will address this in more detail later. So to put things into perspective, before COVID, more than half of employed persons in the European Union traveled less than 30 minutes from home to work, and less than 1 in 10 workers had a commuting time of 60 minutes or more. So if these persons in our counties that you can see in the map have to travel so long to get to work, they will probably not work there at all, which poses, of course, then problem to socioeconomic equality. I also mentioned the degree of urbanization in Croatia, and as you can see, the majority of the country, almost whole Croatia, if you look territorially, is rural. And according to the National Transport Strategy, the lowest density of the population and the biggest decline in the number of inhabitants are visible in rural areas and parts of the country with weak traffic connections. And this overlaps mostly with the counties that I mentioned in the previous slide. In these counties, public transport is not well organized, it's too expensive for most residents, and this results in further decay and isolation of these areas. Furthermore, something that has already been mentioned, so there is a certain role of natural barriers and adverse climates in impacting transport poverty. So in counties like Lika-Senj and Primorje-Gorski Kotar, we have a relief that actually, and the quality of roads that actually does not allow all the villages or small settlements to be connected with public transport. Regarding islands, we have to be aware that every 30th inhabitant of the Republic of Croatia lives on an island. It's like then 3% of the total population, which doesn't sound much, but having in mind that we are a disappearing nation and that every inhabitant is important, then we can see the importance of also keeping life in the islands. I was looking for an information because I had it written, and I will find it about the number of islands. So according to the latest census, 52 islands and the Pelješac Peninsula are permanently inhabited. And the island population lives in 355 settlements. So you can see that you cannot just disregard this whole group of population in terms of transport services because it has a social impact. Something also addressed in previous presentations are the transport needs of specific populations, elderly, disabled, or marginalized groups. And without much thinking, we can conclude in Croatia that most of these groups, most of the members of these groups can be, without further analysis, put into the groups of those who are transport poor. Even in big cities who are at least jeopardized by transport poverty, the transport services of the disabled are not well managed. But you also have to understand that there are more than 600,000 people in Croatia with disabilities, which is an enormous number having in mind our population. So we have to think about how to address this issue, especially in rural areas where no transport services for the disabled are mostly established. We do rely on these programs run by associations, such as the one presented by Vladimir, but it's not a really structured and reliable process. We have to have a system for addressing this issue. Okay. Also, there is a national plan for the promotion of equal opportunities for persons with disabilities, and they identified in their measures a need to significantly increase the number of passenger trains and ships adjusted to persons with disabilities. And they wrote there that the current number of suitable passenger trains is 18, while 68 is needed. The last two factors I included in this presentation that are related to transport poverty is the inequality among the distribution of the population among the counties. So that's related to actually the density of population and also addressed in previous presentations. So it's clear that a very sparsely inhabited areas cannot have public transport service established in a traditional sense of word, with frequent schedule, with big buses and line transport. But there are multiple variants of public transport services that can exist in these areas and can help the population to stay connected. At the end, an examination of all national public policies and respective institutional framework is needed because they all impact transport poverty. It includes not only regional development and transport strategies, but also social equality strategies, also job and growth strategies. So although we have a limited time frame to dedicate ourselves to the social climate plan at the moment, this is something that should be done, if not in short term, then in midterm. So to conclude, what would be the guiding points for the measures that will be included in the social climate plan? First of all, this plan should be perceived as an opportunity to rectify the fact that high-quality public transport services and their establishment and maintenance in Croatia have been permanently neglected. I will not go into the modes. I mean, we all know I presume we all know the hierarchy of modes and what should be improved first, and then how the feeder system goes. But wherever is possible, we have to develop what we already have. We have to introduce new lines, new vehicles, new services, which are adjusted to the regional needs. This can significantly contribute in resolving demographic and economic challenges because people would not all live in Zagreb if they had good connections to come here when possible, or they would rather live somewhere else, I think. And no region should be neglected when thinking about the quality of transport service availability. Although there is a possibility to include the help to individual households or persons as a measure in the social climate plan, this is not sufficient or appropriate to address the transport poverty issues in Croatia. What needs to be done actually is to tailor-made this measures to reach the ones who need it most, but based on territorial and socioeconomic analysis, and also comprising of measures that will strengthen the public transport system and enable all persons to have a suitable alternative to car, which is not expensive and which allows them to go over their daily obligations. All relevant national level institutions should be included in this, not only one ministry, not only one sector, to ensure a holistic and comprehensive approach. And also having in mind that the rural areas are those areas which are most sensitive, we have to understand that we have to think innovatively. We can't afford to repeat, okay, public transport is not economically feasible there. There are other innovative ways, and we should try to find them to alleviate the transport challenges faced there. And I think this is it for me. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra, for this valuable deep dive into this topic. I think it presents very relevant challenges that actually causes mobility poverty, and what we have to have in mind while dealing with this problem. So although there is Croatia in your title in presentation, I think that most of the audience from other countries could relate to the topics, to the data, and also the challenges that you mentioned here. So it is out of great importance to think about these topics, to think about all the vulnerable groups that should be tackled by the future measures that should be really tailored, as you mentioned. But also, you said in the end of the presentation that there are innovative ways and innovative projects and approaches to this topic. So this is perfect introduction for the next presentation and the final presentation in this first part of the webinar. So now I welcome Zvonimir Perko from the Regional Energy Agency North, where he works as a senior project manager for projects focusing on energy efficiency, renewable energy, and sustainable mobility. So today he will present an ongoing project for shared electromobility and its possibilities in rural area. It is all about rural med mobility project. So Zvonimir, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see my presentation. It's
Yes.
okay? Great. Today, as you said, I'm going to present our Rural Med Mobility project. A little bit about the project. It's financed through Interreg Euromed program. Here you can see some numbers about important numbers about the project, important information. About our project partners, we have 13 partners from 8 different countries, from Spain, Croatia, Portugal, Slovenia, Bulgaria, Bosnia, Italy, and Greece. About our work plan, we have 4 work packages. It's for us the most important work package is work package 1 that we are leading. It's about current state, needs, and potential of rural EV infrastructure. Work package 2 is about preparation and fine-tuning for launching pilot activities. Work package 3 is about thematic pilots implementations, and work package 4 is evaluation of results. About our agency, through this project, we are providing technical and other means of support to the institutional partner, Koprivnica-Križevci County. Also, we are leading, as I said, work package 1, where we have already created 2 very important and very useful documents. First one is Guide of Good Practices in Rural Med Area. This document contains detailed description of more than 30 different successfully implemented projects all across the EU related to EV charging stations, shared sustainable mobility schemes, and sustainable mobility integration with other transport systems. I can share it with everyone that will be interested after. You can mail me so I can share these 2 documents. This document can be a very good source of ideas for submitting some new projects on different programs, so it can be very useful. About another document, Joint Self-Assessment Study on Sustainable Mobility. This study is on current sustainable mobility situation on EU level and on partners national level. It's mainly about legislative situation and the financing models available in each country. It also can be very useful to see development status in each country and maybe space for improvement in your country. Also, our role is preparation and implementation of the pilot action. This is for EV charging station in rural areas. Also, we are going to monitor and analyze functioning of installed charging stations and, of course, organization of workshops and promotional activities. About our pilot installations, we are going to implement 4 EV charging stations in rural areas. This is 4 municipalities, Gola, Ferdinandovac, Kalnik, and Gornja Rijeka. We are going to test this from 3 perspectives. First one is ownership, testing of different processes, testing of different cases of pilot buildings. For example, we have clear ownership where the building is owned by a project partner, Koprivnica-Križevci County. We have divided ownership where county owns just part of the building, and we have ownership where a municipality owns the building. So we are going to test these 3 types. Also, we are going to test EV charging stations by power. We are going to have 4 different output power of EV charging stations that will be adjustable on each location and could be changed during the testing. Power output will be based on analysis of the consumption curve and least power of the building or transformer. So testing will be based on analysis of relation between different technical, financial, and operational perspectives and output power. And the third perspective is location. About the location, it's important to state that we have one location near border with Hungary. We have another location on a very important road that connects north and east of Croatia. It's called Podravska Magistrala. We have also one touristic location. This is old town of Kalnik that is very popular for hiking especially. And we have location that is I would say nowhere. It's just a regular municipality, a regular location. So here you can see some pictures of those locations. First one is municipality of Ferdinandovac. It's near Podravska Magistrala, important road. Second one is municipality of Gola. It's on border with Hungary. We have a location of touristic location of municipality of Kalnik and municipality of Gornja Rijeka. About other partners, we have partners from Spain, Italy, and Greece that will have a car sharing project for citizens in rural areas. They will implement 3 EV charging stations, 2 electric vehicles that will be leased on 18 months, and they will produce some software of management. Also in Portugal, they will have car sharing, but for public administration in rural areas. And in Slovenia and Bulgaria, they will test EV chargers with different power. So that's it. This is shortly our project. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. And of course, if you want these 2 documents that we already produced, I can send it to you. Just call me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zvonimir. I think it would be good if you could share these documents with us. We can also include them in our final report, and also for those who are interested to look deeper in this, because you showcased how infrastructure development, or rather to say improvement, can play a pivotal role in improving mobility in underserved areas. So we mentioned several times the addressing technical issues and possibilities is important while dealing with this topic and this recent problem. Now I think you can stop sharing your screen, and thank you once again. So with that, we conclude the individual presentation part, and we will move to the panel discussion. I will just have to announce actually that we will prolong a little bit our webinar, because we started a little bit later than we supposed to. So at least for 15 minutes, there will be a longer webinar, but that's good, because this topic is very relevant and fresh, let's say, in the broadcasting, let's say. So we have a lot of things to discuss on this topic, and for sure there will be more webinars and more related activities to this topic of transport poverty. In the beginning of the panel discussion, I would like to introduce our actually last speaker today that I haven't had the opportunity to present before. It's Pedro Homem de Gouveia. I hope I pronounced your name good, from Polis Network, who brings expertise in urban governance and sustainable mobility. So Pedro actually is a senior policy and project manager at the Polis Network, where he coordinates the working groups for governance and integration, but also for road safety and security. His work also focuses on creating safer, more inclusive urban environments through evidence-based design and participatory approaches. The other panelists I presented before, I invite Dragos and Sofia and Petra as well to turn on their cameras and join us on the on the main screen of this discussion. So I suggest that we are going right to the questions. And for the audience, I would like to ask you to put your questions in the chat where I can see them, because for some reasons I cannot access to the Q&A part. Oh, actually now I can, sorry. It's fine. You can post your questions either through chat or Q&A. Q&A part. I hope you sharpened your keyboards so you can start writing your questions. So as we heard all the speakers so far, I hope, Pedro, you are here and are hearing us.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, good. Welcome. So the first question actually refers to you. We saw that transport poverty is actually a challenge that has been known for many years, and we saw in the presentations that rural areas face additional mobility constraints, which can significantly impact the quality of life and access to essential services. There are many things to consider, and moreover, the public services are decreasing in rural areas, and there are a lower number of bus and train lines than 50 years ago. So despite its importance of this problem, it remains relatively unexplored in transport spatial planning and transport management. There are few analysis and researches so far. These are the most recent ones that I know about. So, Mr. Pedro, would you tell us actually why is the focus on this topic only now? How to emphasize more the importance of dealing with transport poverty while ensuring just transition toward climate neutrality? It's all relevant topics, so could you explain it a little bit?
Yeah. Hi, Magdalena. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Well, first of all, let me start by thanking you. Well, yes, for the opportunity to speak, but above all, for the opportunity this gave me to watch the fantastic presentations so far. So I bow respectfully and humbly to all the speakers and researchers and practitioners. I think these were very high-level presentations. I'm not surprised, but it's really great. Well, you're asking me to guess why is the focus on this topic now? Well, I don't know. It doesn't make sense, right? Because it's such an important issue. But let me maybe say two things, and basically about why transport poverty and rural mobility and is becoming its importance is rising in the policy agenda, at least at the EU level. Well, I think two things are useful to say. Well, number one, because of fear. If you go and read the Social Climate Fund, the legislation that created the Social Climate Fund, you can read between the lines that there's fear. Many of you may remember that in 2018, when the French government raised by a slight bit the tax on fuel, on fossil fuels, a huge revolt erupted by the Yellow Jackets or Gilets jaunes, and they basically paralyzed the country for a few days, and the government didn't know what to do, and it finally backtracked and removed the fuel tax. So if you read the legislation for the Social Climate Fund, you can clearly see between the lines that there's fear that this will, because the same is expected to happen. The emissions trading system too, now as Petra explained, will apply to road transport. It will raise fossil fuel prices inevitably. So yeah, people may revolt. And so the idea behind the Social Climate Fund is, and these are my words, not in the legislation, is to prepare society for this change and to try to create some permanent solutions that when fossil fuel prices start to rise, well, people won't be so affected. So that's basically, I would say, an inside policy explanation. Now, there are two questions here. Number one, is it about everybody or is it about people who use cars? The main concern if you again read the legislation, it doesn't say it's to help people move away from cars or whatever. There's several possibilities to really help people transition from a internal combustion engine car to an electric car and to use money from the Social Climate Fund for that. Now, some people, maybe for some households, that may be the best solution indeed. Is that really the solution to solve the transport poverty as a whole and to really improve rural mobility? Definitely not. So I think that's one of the issues we will see as the members states submit their national plans. Is it about business as usual, but now electric? Or is it really about rethinking mobility? A second question, I don't have an answer for it, and I just think we're going to see is how much of the concern about transport poverty is really about rural mobility. Because rural, I mean, so you can classify what's rural territory, what it's urban territory, etc. I mean, the issue is there's vast suburban and peri-urban areas in metropolitan areas in Europe, which is where revolt came mostly in 2018 in France. And so how much of transport poverty's concern is about rural areas themselves, people live away from everything, or is it mostly about suburban and peri-urban areas? It's a policy question. I don't have an answer, but I think it's just to put it out there that things aren't, when we say, it's in the focus, transport poverty and rural mobility are in the focus right now, it's not necessarily. And we have to make sure that whatever resources have been created really are invested in the right thing. And that should be definitely in the focus. And finally, if I may, just a second part of the answer regarding the academic side. Many years ago, a gentleman called Kingdom, a political scientist in the US, published a seminal work about how does policy change? How does the policy agenda change? Why? What makes it change? What creates opportunities for change? And that is an important and interesting model, not just to understand what's going, but also for us advocates and transport professionals to really keep things on track. So what Kingdon said was that policy changes when three things combine. There is an acknowledgement of the problem, so it is recognized that there is a problem, which makes sense because if there isn't a problem, why should policymakers spend their political capital in something that isn't the problem? But that's not enough. That there must be an availability, a knowledge of solutions. Again, that makes sense. Why would political officials invest their political capital in a problem that has no solution? And thirdly, so it's important to talk about the problem. It's very important also to talk about the various possible solutions and how they are within our reach. And finally, he said, well, it's also a question of agenda. Is it gaining attention, public attention at the moment? Which also makes sense. Why would political officials invest their political capital in things that nobody's watching? So I think that at the same time, this is an opportunity. It's an advancement, definitely, but it's also an opportunity, and we must remain alert to make sure that this opportunity is put to good use. Being in the focus is good, but it's not enough. That's it.
Yeah, I agree. And just related to that, I would like to ask you additional question on how to approach with dealing with other challenges that those who tackles with transport mobility has. For example, there is a silo-minded approach in city governments. There are a lack of qualitative data and Petra also mentioned the must and the urgency of more analysis, how to tackle those that are vulnerable. There's the lack of multi-level cooperation in many countries. So how actually to tackle that, having in mind that all what you have previously said?
Yeah, well, Well, first of all, and this is I'm not a researcher. I do have 21 years of experience working at the local level, like many of you watching today. So greetings. But I think that when we talk about, I think qualitative data can indeed be very, very useful. And one of the problems with quantitative data, so numbers and quantities and this and that, is that often the tools that we develop to collect those quantitative data, they reflect the system that we have, because most of this data is collected through instruments that are embedded in the procedures and the protocols and the services and the institutions that we have. So, I mean, obviously, qualitative data, in my personal experience, can be particularly useful because it surprises us. When you go and talk and interview a user or an inhabitant somewhere, a citizen, he's not aware of the way your mind is compartmented and of the terms you use. Oh, this is transport poverty, this is that, and there's the no. I mean, they what they say reflects their life and their needs, and often their needs surprise us, and that's what pushes us to evolve and to improve our governance and our systems. So I would say, first of all, regarding qualitative data, listening to people, that's for my part as a professional, that's been the biggest utility, is to surprise me and to force me and my teams to really look into things that our systems aren't addressing. Now, regarding the silo mindset, again, as a public official, I think that it's very important to understand. I think everybody knows that, but nevertheless, it's important to reiterate. Look, silos are necessary. The problem is not that we have silos. The problem is if we only have silos. Silos have to do with the specialization and with the verticalization. We need to specialize and we need hierarchies. That's what makes an organization. That's what organizes a system. The problem is when we only have silos and when we don't have robust horizontal connections amongst different sectors, for example. So amongst different actors, amongst different types of levels of governance. So the problem really is how can we foster cooperation? What kind of structures, what kind of processes? Sometimes it's something that has to be reflected at the structural level of organizations. Sometimes it's something that is more about a process. So and the second point is that cooperation doesn't just grow by magic. It needs a concrete focus. It needs to focus on problems. It needs to focus on challenges. It needs to focus on goals. Just bringing people together to sit around the table and say, okay, so what are we going to cooperate about? No. It needs focus, and focus like, the rural mobility challenge. Transport poverty is a good focus. So we need focus. We also need cooperation, not only within within the same public organization, of course, across departments and sectors, but also across different jurisdictions at the same level. So, for example, different municipalities cooperating with each other. This is usually a big challenge as well. And of course, cooperation across levels of public governance, which is, for example, one of the big challenges evolving for the development of these national social climate plans that Petra talked about. How will these, because national governments have their own jurisdiction, their own competencies, and thus will have their own policy priorities. How much of these priorities, and if they're the ones doing the national climate plans, well, those plans will tend to reflect the priorities of the national level, not necessarily of the regional level. And that's one of the challenges we face. Then finally, we also need cooperation across public and private sector. And we need to understand when we discuss transport that, transport providers, private transport, we need to understand, first of all, that public transport isn't getting a subsidy. Public transport is being compensated for the fact that public transport companies do not have the possibility to set the price of the tickets or to set all other aspects of commercial organization that makes a business profitable. So because we take these two possibilities away from these companies, and well, so that we can ensure a public service, then we need to compensate them. Yes, formally they are called subsidies, but I think it's very important that we always alert everybody that they're about the compensation, not subsidization of a losing game. We also have to understand if we want to bring other, when we bring private providers of transport, of mobility services into this challenge, we are bringing businesses, and with the businesses, we are bringing their capacity, but also their capital. So what we have to do is not simply to, if we're talking about, promoting carpooling and car sharing and shared micromobility, etc., what we're doing is not buying and paying for 100% of their service, but is to giving them an incentive, yes, through a thing we also call subsidies, but is giving them an incentive to operate in areas and at times and with users where they wouldn't see a commercial interest, at least enough commercial interest to ensure their business survival. So again, what we have to do is to really provide incentives so that they bring their capacity and with it their capital for that. And finally, I would say, cooperation across sectors. So not only this is not a transport poverty is not a transport issue per se. It's a health issue because people have difficulty accessing health services. It is an educational issue because students and households have difficulty accessing educational service, social services, etc. It's a private problem as well because people have difficulty accessing shops and other types of businesses. So sometimes, yes, the problem is how will we bring people to these services? But for example, one thing that is highly unexplored is how can we instead bring these services closer to these people? That's a huge challenge for rural areas, of course, but it doesn't mean that for any medical appointment, the only solution is to pick this old lady, put her in a van or in a taxi, and drive her 50 kilometers away. Maybe there are ways for local health services to provide consultations in different locations throughout the week. It's just an example. The point is, we have to create ways also to make the services more accessible. That doesn't necessarily imply transporting people there. And finally, to keep in mind that transport poverty is a regional problem. It's not a national problem. It's a regional problem. It's not about people being able to travel across their country and to go see the capital or to, it's about people being able to lead their everyday lives and to reduce the vulnerability that people currently have regarding, for example, fuel prices or transport prices. So it's a regional problem. It must be approached and thought of at the regional level. Of course, national social climate plans are being developed by the member states, but we have to keep in mind that the real role of the member states here is to create a framework for regional level approach to transport poverty. Sprinkling subsidies at the national level will not solve transport poverty. That is a problem for people who currently suffer from transport poverty, but that will be a huge problem for our democratic states because in a few years, when the fossil fuel prices start to rise dramatically, if we don't have these alternatives in place, it'll be a huge problem, not only a transport problem, it'll be a social and thus a political problem. So as I would really reiterate also what Petras mentioned in the end of her presentation, we really need to take this opportunity to create long-term solutions and not just provide some mitigation, a temporary mitigation. That's it.
Yeah, thank
I
you
could
very
go
much.
on, but I don't want to monopolize.
No, there are a few points that I will refer back later with other speakers, just to, from their perspective, to bring a little bit more in detail there. But indeed, you said everything that is in line actually with previous presentation, and it's perfectly aligns with them. So yeah, Petra mentioned in several times that everyone should be involved, also as well as you did from other ministries, but also through NGOs and other relevant stakeholders. So Petra, my next question is related to your experience and your expertise. But before I pose the question, I will just say that we will finish the first round of questions for all the panelists. So then I will go back to the questions from audience. So Petra, based on your experience and based on what Pedro mentioned in his answer, what methodologies proved to be effective in determining most vulnerable groups, and what gaps should be covered or triggered to implement such methodology on the example of Croatia, let's say? Do you have actually a unique answer for that?
Well, the problem is that you asked me what methodologies are proven effective. Since we haven't implemented anything yet, none of them has proven to be effective in addressing transport poverty in Croatia yet. However, I mean, there is a certain relevance of having data, which Pedro mentioned, and we have this issue that, for instance, only looking at public transport, we don't have any unique point of collecting public transport related information. So at this point, we don't even know what are the coverage what is the coverage of certain public transport operators in different counties where different types of public transport services exist. So even if we went to the regional level and asked the regions to tell us exactly what kind of transport services exist, and for instance, what are the costs and tariffs, I doubt that they would have, all of them, that they would have a very reliable answer to that. So, despite of the fact that we have to prepare the social transport plan now with what we got, we need to establish some kind of a system to collect this data, because we will need this data in the future. So we have to put some body in charge. So far, none is in charge. And we also have to think about how to include the mobility related questions into the standard service, which are implemented by the state. For instance, the coverage of transport related issues in the current census questions is insufficient to understand the overall topic and the problems. This is one thing. And also I have to say that everyone who ever did any kind of analysis knows that quantified data cannot be looked like this. You have to keep a common sense, and there are some things that we already know without having the quantified data and the database that we will present to the European Commission. For instance, we already know the situation for our islands. We know that they are depopulating. We know that there are no public services there. We know that they all have to travel to mainland to get the basic health services. And I know that in some places, like medical telediagnosis is established. For instance, Pedro mentioned it as a possibility to avoid the need for mobility, but it's only of limited use. I mean, at the end, people have to visit doctors for treatments. Also, we don't have high schools everywhere, so students need to go to the high school, and not all of them can get into the dorm. They have to travel. So we already know these things. So when we now draft these measures, or when the ministry drafts these measures, we have to keep our common sense and what we already know and try to target the measures to address these solutions, whether they are transport-related measures, directly transport-related, or what Pedro mentioned, social or education or health-related measures.
Yeah, thank you very much. I like your answer. And now I will switch a little bit to the administrative boundaries that also Pedro mentioned, but you, Petra. And I will switch now to Dragos and Sofia to answer this question from their perspective and their researchers, not only this research they presented, but also their experience from Mobilissimus. Because Pedro stressed out that this is a regional problem. So, but in your presentation, but also Vladimir's as well, we heard that administrative boundaries and operator-dependent pricing are cited as like major contributors to fragmentation in transport services, especially when the boundary of one county ends, then ends the service as well. So that's one of the problems as well that should be tackled here. So what role the regional and cross-municipal collaboration can have in overcoming this barrier? And do you have any successful case study or example that you can point out now so that we have like a showcase to continue to work on while dealing with this topic?
Cool. Thank you, Magdalena. I think I'll take this question. On one hand, what I would say, like I will start an example from our case study in Brasov, Dorsura Buzovlu, and it is essentially a metropolitan bus service that operates from Brasov Metropolitan Transport System. It goes for a few kilometers into Kovasna County, which is linking towards Dorsura Buzovlu, and then leaves the county, goes back into Brasov, because that's how the road network goes. Like you do have a few settlements within Kovasna, which would link quite easily towards Dorsura Buzovlu, but the Metropolitan Brasov Transport Public Service does not stop on the territory of Kovasna County. And that is a classic example. And that should be, from our perspective, really easily fixable, to say so, with a few agreements. But it is all about financials. It is about who gets what passengers and so on, and the revenues from those passengers. And that is a classical issue that's repeated in many other places. And we do feel like that should be eliminated. That is the type of regional, focused, pointy type of action that can solve a problem for many, many people living within that area, basically. That's the starting point. So based on that now, at least within counties covering a wider area, in Romania, for instance, because of the directive which was mentioned previously, 1370 from 2020, if I'm not wrong, the one dealing with the subsidies and how the services, public services should be helped, to say so. That led to the development of metropolitan transport agencies across the country. And that is usually county level integration, but in some cases, the ones that were more at the leading end of the, like adopting those measures, they have actually developed cross-county collaborations, because there are communities that are closer together than the county hubs, and then they decided to create a regional metropolitan agency to deal with the transport issue that way, and that was on the back of that European directive, and we can see that change is happening. In terms of integration across operators, I was asking my colleague, Andras, who's a lot more experienced than I am on the topic on public transport, and he gave us a few good examples from using the Klima tickets we used in Austria and the Deutschland ticket, which are basically offering at a regional level a lower fare for a wider population that is actually integrating and reducing mobility poverty by having that flat rate approach, where people don't feel like they're discriminated against the price that they're paying. Similarly, but not at the same scale, in Brasov a few years ago, and now I'm more looking at the urban and peri-urban areas. They had different tariffs, and now 2 years ago or so, maybe a bit longer, they have managed to get everyone on the same flat rate. So even if you're traveling for one stop within the city center, or you're going from Brasov city center to the other end, close to Kovasna County, which is a solid 20 kilometers away, you are paying the same price of 4 lei, which is our currency. And that is quite helpful for the rural population traveling longer distances, being usually disadvantaged by the previous tariff system. And that is one approach of tackling that. But that is within the same transport operator. Extending that to a wider range of public transport operators, or extending that across a railway company and the local transport operator, local bus transport operator, that would be amazing. And that can be done. In this example we are talking about, we have Dorsura Buzovlu and Brasov, and there is one transport one train operator only, running 6 services each way on that line. And that can be easily associated with the local bus operator to make sure that they do have a service where they can integrate the ticketing for that one aspect. It is regional, and as Pedro said, and that should make it easier to tackle overall. But do we trust the politicians? Do we trust the politicians, the policymakers to collaborate? That's what our role should be as a next step, most likely, to push that, to give them the best case, the best practice examples, and demonstrate, on one hand, the financial value, long term. Short term, it's hard to demonstrate that, but it is there. But long term, it's easier to demonstrate, and that's how we can win minds and hearts from that perspective. And then if you start from there, they will see how the community gets more vibrant, the rural area will be more vibrant, the elderly will be more able to move around, and so on. Children will be easier to access schools or high schools and so on. People are highly mobile, and they are increasingly mobile, but this is not about long distance mobility. This is about 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers only, and should make it easier to work. And because of that distance is smaller, cross boundaries in terms of administrations, that should be easier. Cross operators, it has to start with the cross boundary from our perspective, because it is easier to have a higher level senior leadership, political leader, I'm thinking, to drive that behavior change in terms of how decisions are being made within operators and within the industry, basically. I will stop there for now, unless Jofi has anything else to add, but I think...
Yeah, that's the last that you mentioned is a topic for itself, so we will not go deeper in that topic for now. Maybe for some other webinar, I should put a note for that. But yeah, behavioral change, we mentioned in several times that it is important to achieve, and actually to raise the awareness of the people who are transport poor, and how their services can be improved. So I see that in Q&A, one question is related to that and is combined with my question. Next question for Zvonimir is actually, when you were choosing these remote areas that you are working with now in your project, what were the criteria for selecting specific municipalities? You emphasized in your presentation for the installation of EV charging stations. And there's the question from someone from the audience, to what extent are local self-government units involved in the project? So could you elaborate a little bit more, Zvonimir, on that?
Thank you. My camera is not working, sorry for that, but I will try to explain. First criteria was to have, when we were choosing locations, was to have reliable partners, reliable municipalities. So we choose partners that we have already cooperated before, and we know that it's going to be easy to work with them and to deal with different problems. Another thing is that we want to have different type of locations. So as I already said, we have location near border with Hungary. We have location with near important road that connects north and east of Croatia. We have one touristic location and we have one regular location. So the idea was to discover through this project how much and will anyone charge their vehicles on such locations. And is these locations really are in undeserved areas? But of course, the question is, will maybe those charging stations that will be implemented improve number of guests and tourists in those municipalities? For example, if it will increase the number of overnight stays, maybe. So this is some kind of criteria that we were looking for when we were choosing our locations. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I forgot to unmute myself. Sorry. Yeah, thank you for the answer. And I see Dragos put his hand up. I just wanted to refer to you as well on this matter. So please go on.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Well, all I wanted is literally just to flag a potential trap that we tend to fall into quite often when you, Zvonimir said that we're working with areas that where we worked before because we work well with them. That is a trap because I've seen that being done in other places in that context, cycling bubble, but it was the same. Like if you help the community where you have the openness and then you start doing that and do that, and then actually we are still leaving aside the most vulnerable, the ones that they don't engage, the seldom heard voices, and it is up to us to actually knock their door and offer those operators, local authorities, communities the help, because just working with those that we worked in the past, it might be a trap basically. Yeah, that is that's the starting point and the comment I had to make, and it is one of those things that where we do have the openness from a local authority or the context, we should showcase that to whoever is the proxy for that area to try to boost that message and to demonstrate the value because it worked next door, and then we should be able to make it work around them as well and grow that way, because it is quite hard. Even here, we focus a lot on Croatia, but in Romania, we did a study in one location, one community, and that's it. And yes, we talked to a few people, but because the momentum is not quite there yet, it takes that, to build up that momentum takes a lot longer than we expect. Even if there is the openness at high level, even if we have the funding, even if we have the policies, that's not trickling down at grassroots level. And on top of the high level discussion we had up to this point, what we have seen quite often is it's a set of decisions that were made over a couple of years. Imagine a community at the outskirts of the city, bounded by a railway line, and then you have some social housing built on the same area, and people have a factory to go to from that area. And you already have low working, low paid jobs in an area that is already severed by the railway in this railway network. And then the local operator didn't provide a bus connection there, and you have already a transport poverty environment, which has been almost designed by a set of measures that were poorly made, basically. And that's what we should drive, move away from, basically, from now on. We shouldn't allow policymakers to make those changes now or those measures now.
So actually the conclusion here is that we have to build the capacity of the local governments, but also public transport operators, and raise the awareness of the locals, residents, citizens to know what the problem is and how they can help themselves, and what they have to address in talking to their local communities, let's say. But yeah, thank you. Now we finished our first round of questions, and I will try to address some more questions from the audience. I see that Ms. Nieves Burger has her hand up. So if you hear us, you have the possibility to unmute yourself. So you're welcome to reach your question. Okay, if not, there are some new messages. Okay. Mr. Gonzalo wants to know what leads to the impact of automobility being often overlooked in regional development approaches, with the car being regarded as purely as an urban issue. So would anyone voluntarily answer this question from our panelists?
Well, I can try because we had an interesting discussion yesterday related to a perceivement of transport-related problems in small cities and rural areas. Well, the issue is very simple. I mean, when you are in a city and you own a car and you always get stuck in traffic congestion and travel long to work and you live in polluted air, then this problem seems like a relevant problem that should be solved immediately or as soon as possible. But when you live in a rural community where you have a free road most often and it's easy for you to get from point A to point B, you don't see that much of a problem in it. You're living in a healthy green environment, you need a car to go somewhere quickly, and this is it. So the thinking about standard mobility issues are more is more congestion related and air pollution related, so in cities than in villages. However, this automobilization or motorization, as you said, is going to be relevant also for the rural areas, not because of these topics that I just mentioned. It's because if the fuel prices really rise, thanks to all the changes, then the persons who use their cars regularly in rural areas will have issues with bearing the costs of fuel. And their mobility will be severely jeopardized. So the things that they did throughout the day and their active and then their field of activity will have to shrink due to these costs. So that is why we are now looking also these car-related issues into rural areas. So this is my attempt to answer the question, but I'm not sure if the person asking it is content. So
maybe I could try to add something. You know, what I do see, what I do hear a lot is this assumption that, you know, okay, so in urban areas, it's important that people shift from car to public transport to bikes to this and that. Fine. Yeah, but in rural areas, you know, you need a car. It's kind of a self-evident truth. And it's wrong because, you know, there's a lot of people in rural areas, and it's not that, you know, can't use a car because of their age, because of they don't have a driver's license. It's not only because of the money they don't have, because they're young. We usually think about old people, but there are young people as well, because the household can only have a car. So basically, the husband goes out and the wife is stuck at home for the whole day. This idea that, yeah, cars are a solution for urban areas, that's evident. No, they're not. First of all, they're not a solution for everybody. Second, that when we discuss cars, we are actually taking as two things at the same time. One thing is the use of a car for travel. The other thing is the ownership of that vehicle. So yes, we have seen huge dispersion, and you can go with a train or with a 60-seat bus everywhere. And definitely, this dispersion necessarily requires the use of smaller vehicles, and dispersion in larger distances require the use of smaller motorized vehicles. But then there are other solutions that we usually don't talk about as much. You know, car sharing, carpooling. France, the Ile-de-France region, just launched a major carpooling solution for carpooling system for its region. Ile-de-France is the region of Paris, but 72% of the region is rural. It's a massive area, and they're using carpooling. So thirdly, when we discuss the car, we fail to understand that the problem is not the use of car by itself. It's that it's the monopoly that it has over the transport sector, in terms of, you know, the way it sucks up all the money that goes into infrastructure, into enforcement, into fiscal benefits, and this and that for fuel. So the solution for a situation of monopoly is not to reinforce or prolong that monopoly. So if forced car ownership is a problem, the solution is not to help people who are in a situation of course forced car ownership. The solution is not to help them buy the next car, now electric. This, you know, it's really to help in the region to help curate and foster the emergence of an alternative menu of transport options. So it's to create options. And that includes keeping the car on the menu, but fostering the emergence of other options. On this point, just one issue. I mean, it worries me sometimes that we are focused on those who cannot afford, or those who can barely afford public transport, or those who are in a situation of low income, etc., etc. Yes, we must address their needs, but the point is, when we develop transport solutions, we must develop solutions that are available and appealing to a wider group as possible. Because, for example, public transport also needs that. Any transport service requires cross-subsidization, so that you get the more people who can pay more also cover the cost, help cover the costs of those who can pay less, or areas that get more use cover the revenues from those areas, help cover the costs from areas that generate less revenue. So this cross-subsidization is critical, and for that we need people with all levels of income to benefit from these solutions created by to address transport poverty.
Yes, it has to be tailored to everyone. I agree. Now we slowly approaching to an end of the webinar. There is one more question from the audience, and then I have just two more questions. One for Zvonimir actually, and one for you, Pedro, to sum up somehow a little bit the this webinar. Petra, you mentioned you have to go earlier because of the other meeting as well, so you're free to go. Thank you very much for your contribution here, and for all the relevant information you provide us with.
Thank you, Magdalena. I will stay for five more minutes to listen to the answers, if I may, and then I have to leave.
Then you're free to stay.
Okay. Thank you, and have a nice day, everyone. I will just switch offline in 5 minutes.
Thanks, Petra. The last question from the audience that I have here is the big question from Professor Klečina from the University North. Maybe if you would like to put on your mic so that you can present your question yourself, so that I not mention something wrong. You have a possibility to unmute yourself if you would like. If not, I can read your question. Okay, I see you unmute yourself, but I can hear you. Well, I still cannot hear you, so that's okay. I will read the question. It is about the standardization on or the standards in public transport services for different types of. We can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, my question is that we were not discussing any issue, but regarding the standards when it comes to public transport. There are two important issues: frequency of departures and operational times. That's the first one, and the second one is to actually offer certain connectivity towards the other transportation systems, like connections in urban nodes and so on. So you can actually get to some places. And I was just wondering how come that we maybe missed that from all the presentations. The coverage is nice. But it's not the same thing whether the coverage is in the morning or in the evening. So you need to have a certain standard for certain parts of the day, for the entire day, and we haven't talked about it as much. And I think it's an important issue, so that's why I wanted to put this question on the table to really talk about some reachability, accessibility. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ante. Dragos would like to answer your question.
I will be really, really quick. Thank you for that question, because that it shows that we can be in some cases focusing on specific aspects and ignoring a few other things. But I can reassure that at least us within Mobilissimus, maybe not specifically on this project as we presented it now, but then when we analyzed the whole situation on the ground. We have looked at those. We know what services are going where, or the lack of services going between those places where we looked at. But we do on the projects where we are working on consultancy with transport operators or local authorities. This is exactly our focus: harmonization, synchronization of services, connectivity, understanding what lines go where, and then how can we integrate those with universities, hospitals, the train network, timetable, and so on. So we do focus on that. Depends a lot on who runs the project, but then if they are true transport planning professionals, they will think about those things, and then it's something that we are aware of. Depends a lot on how much emphasis we put on that in a presentation, I think, but overall in the practice, what we're doing on a daily basis, that is exactly our focus, basically. Interval-based timetables where we can make sure that people who have, they need to interchange, they will have overlapping schedules, and on common sections, they can actually interchange at right intervals, ideally with easily predictable. If you don't have to know exactly what time the bus will arrive, because you know that your bus will be every 6 minutes, for instance, and you use that approach, and you have two lines, one every 6, one every 12 minutes, and you have that routine, and then you only remember, oh, first bus is at 6 o'clock, and then +6, and then you apply that principle. So that is happening. And one quick mention about the earlier question and Petro's comments. I think it's not about automobility or transport that is being overlooked. That's not an issue. I think what is being slightly overlooked is the need for mobility. People want to be mobile. They don't need a car, or they don't need public transport. They don't need a bike. They need to be mobile. And if they're offered the choice or an option to be mobile in whatever way is available to them, they will be happy with that most of the time. But they still need to get to groceries, and then they still get the barber shop. And that is the key, being able to enabling people to be more mobile, or stopping local authorities from disabling people by not offering a low curb or a low entrance floor to a bus, for instance, because it is not the person who is disabled, it's the society disabling them by not offering the right support for that. I'll stop there.
Thank you for these nice words, and it will serve well for my conclusion of the webinar. Just two quick questions more I have. First is for Zvonimir. I think it is important to stress out what will happen after this pilot project ends, because it sounds promising and it is innovative to put this to promote sharing electromobility in rural areas. So in addition to that, we discussed that sustainability and knowledge transfer is critical for long-term impact. During Drago's presentation, I think you mentioned that. So the question is actually, how does the Rural Med project plan to ensure the sustainability of these pilot projects and replicate the success in other regions facing similar mobility challenges? I don't know, the project is still in the beginning, so do you have in mind such replication and sustainability of the project?
Yes, it's very interesting that we have already applied similar project with, but of course with different municipalities and with some changes on last call for cross-border cooperation Hungary-Croatia. We are still waiting for results, but surely we will use findings and knowledge gained in this project to improve the next project. Of course, we have finger crossed that it will be accepted. I want to say just that as we know, in Croatia, it's not much electric vehicles, especially in rural areas. And the question is whether the installation of charging stations in rural areas will encourage people to buy EVs there. And the question we want to answer is what charging price would be acceptable for citizens live there. Of course, there is always a question who will pay for electricity for charging. For start, since it's EU project, electricity will be paid by municipality, but what will happen after a few years when they don't need to pay for it after? So whether citizens will pay for it or they will install charging stations at their houses and charge it for any cheaper prices. Also, will the prices for charging attract tourists and other guests? So this is some questions that we need to answer through this project and through next projects.
Thanks. We're looking forward to the results of the project, and also fingers crossed that everything goes as you aforementioned. And the last question that will, let's say, sum up all this talk about measures and approach to the transport poverty, and as well as to Drago's answer on enabling people to be mobile, goes to the final question goes to Pedro. Then can you tell us in brief what measures or group of measures should be in focus to expand available transport solution and describe the impact of transport poverty, just to sum up what we have talked about?
The answer is yes. No, I'm kidding. Well, maybe just two ideas. Well, number one, we talk a lot about solutions. We don't talk enough about the problem and about how to approach the problem. And I don't know if that's the case in Croatia, but from what I see here at the EU level, transport poverty, okay, do this, do that, do this. But wait a second, what's the problem? And like I said, I think that number one, the critical thing is to understand that this is not about mobility. I understand what Drago said. I would put it in a different way. This is not about mobility. This is about accessibility. People don't just want to move around. They want to, like you said, Dragos, they want to go to the barber shop, to the school, to the education. It's about how can they access the services, the goods. How can they access that? And so, because as you know, mobility is different from accessibility, and lots of mobility can actually be bad for accessibility. If you have to move 30 kilometers to go to a barber shop, but there's a lot of mobility there, it's not necessarily good. The question is, you want to get your hair cut. Not a problem that I have these days, but anyway. The second thing, like I mentioned, is that it's a regional issue. It really requires a regional approach. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges for the social climate plans, is to understand the problem at the regional level. And above all, to empower local and regional authorities to describe and prioritize the strategies to address this. And finally, that the problem is about the use but it's about the existence of alternatives. And there, I think, is, the big thing. I know that it sounds weird that we talk about shared mobility for rural areas sometimes, but the point is, look, the problem we have is that we have a monopoly of the private car ownership and use. And the solution is to generate diversity, so to foster the emergence of a menu of alternatives. So the more diversified is that menu in terms of the modes, the services, the costs, the hours of operation, etc., the more diversified that menu, the more versatile it will be, because the easier it will be to find options that serve each of your transport needs, wherever it is to go, where, when, to do what, with whom or alone. The more diversity, the easier it is to find a good match between solutions and your problem. And thus, the more diversity, the more reliability. That's the thing that will enable people to pick up other transport modes. I know this sounds weird for the old lady that cannot afford a car and doesn't have a driver's license, but we have to understand from a systemic point of view that the fact that a large number of households is able to solve their transport needs with their own private car is one of the things that has been stopping the emergence of solutions for rural areas. Because those who can afford and drive a car, even if barely afford a car, well, they have a solution. So it's only a part of the population, and perceived as a minority of the population, the poorest, the least educated, the ones with least power, that end up with the problem. So, and don't misunderstand me, there's a lot of money going into rural mobility. The point is, it's going to maintain huge road networks and many other things, so providing subsidies, fiscal benefits to those buying, tens of liters of gasoline every week. So the point is, we need to create solutions in this diversity, through diversity, provide solutions that help everybody, not only those that we think are in a situation of transport poverty, because otherwise, there's a small population of powerless people who are stuck with transport poverty. And that's, I think, one of the biggest strategic problems we have.
I really agree with everything you said. So I will leave that to conclusion. But there is just one more question from the audience. It is a pity not to answer it since this is the last one. So I think, Dragos, you can address it. It is the question: are all the presented solutions related to the calculation of the social optimum point with the aim of increasing the cost of private car transportation and public transport incentives? Just briefly, if you can answer it.
Yeah, I think there is no straightforward answer to that question. It's 50-50. I think what we're doing with those presentations and the solutions we had is to provide the platform for the policymakers to provide the carrot and stick and emphasize the stick a lot more often when it comes to private car use, and incentivize public transport or incentivize the measures that make accessible mobility available to everyone. Like Petro was saying, yes, mobility and accessibility. I live in a neighborhood with 6,000 flats overall with no school or kindergarten. That is a massive issue. And calculating the social benefit or the social gains when we have solutions like we have discussed today for transport poverty, that's the desirable. But I think what we have done with these solutions and with these debates here is to provide that platform for the decisions to be made in the favor of the citizen. And I think that's what's not being fully addressed now. The decisions are made to reflect the financial needs for revenues of transport operators, or to do or keep going the same old ways of local administrative boundaries, or like the old way of doing things. It's preserved, and we should change that. And that's what should be seen as the point of our presentations and solutions, to break those boundaries, break the status quo, and then we'll see what exactly the outcome will be on the ground. But that's what we should be doing today, basically. Well, at least that's my perspective, at least.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think we now came to the end of the webinar. We crossed our time for 40 minutes, but it was a very interesting discussion, and there are 36 brave participants left to hear everything that we have to say here about this relevant topic. There are many doors open for some other webinars in the future. So I will ask participants, but both you board participants and you speakers, to stay tuned for other activities similar to this one, because this is really a hot topic today. It's a pity not to talk about it, because there are many strategies and many approaches to this topic. So a warm thank you goes to all our speakers and panelists, participants, for this engaging webinar. And I hope these insights will inspire action needed to improve the quality of life in areas affected by transport poverty, because we said it's better stick to the actions and dare to try. So as I mentioned, follow-up materials will be available on our website, and have a great day, you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
See you.